in hindsight, I realized that I got most of the jobs that other people had been fired for, and I just wasn't afraid. I was like, I don't know, I guess I could do that. Sometimes I think those programs give fresh eyes to existing problems that often get overlooked. Why does a 29-year-old have the agency to manage an $800 million budget?
Welcome to EIR Live, where we dive into the lives and lessons of entrepreneurs in residence. I'm Ilya Tabakh, together with my co-host Terrance, ready to bring you closer to the heartbeat of the innovation and entrepreneurial spirit. Every episode, we explore the real stories behind the ideas, successes, setbacks, and everything in between. For everyone from aspiring EIRs to seasoned pros, EIR Live is your gateway to the depth of the entrepreneurial journey and bringing innovative insights into the broader world. Check out the full details in the episode description, subscribe to stay updated, and join us as we uncover what it takes to transform visions into ventures. Welcome aboard. Let's grow together. All right, and we're back for another amazing episode. We've had a lot of great guests to date, but today we have Jen Millard, who I had the pleasure of sitting down with for coffee in Austin probably 2.5 or 3 years ago now. And it was funny because that was pretty early in my kind of journey of reaching out and actually sitting down with entrepreneurs in residence and folks that, have kind of that background generally. And it was amazing because Jen and I sat down and it was a really dynamic conversation. I think personality wise, it probably would have been anyway. But it was, every conversation with another EIR is like 10 minutes of therapy and like pretty common shared stories. And I think it was that and then some with Jen. And so I'm really excited that we're able to have her join us on the episode and ultimately get to dig into her kind of amazing and dynamic background. I'm not going to kind of editorialize yet on your background, Jen. I might just ask you to tell us a little bit about how you got started and then ultimately launched into your career. And then we'll kind of walk through that journey. And then Terrance and I will dive in with some questions. So maybe if you can tell us a little bit what launched Jen's career.
Wow. Well, happy to be here, Ilya and Terrance. Thanks so much. And EIR as a topic and as a passion is close to my heart. I think it's probably one of the best roles a founder could ever have the privilege of having. Take some time to think up your next great idea with guardrails placed around your concepting by others. But starting my career, I always say I was a first-gen college student. I hitched a ride to Colby College with my best friend who happened to also get into Colby College. And people always were like, well, did your parents take you to interview? I'm like, I was a poor student from Maine. I just had to figure out how to get to college. So I consider Colby to be a foundational part of my origination, if you will. And at Colby, quickly realized that I was not likely to get a job in Maine after graduating from Colby. My family were lobstermen, excavators, construction home builders. And candidly, the women in the family didn't work in those businesses because my uncles claimed there was bad language. Now, if they knew I moved to software with a bunch of swearing engineers all day, they'd still have a problem with that. But at the time, that was what was going on. So I left Maine to join Sears Roebuck in their management training program. I moved to Chicago. And that was the start of my sort of consumer obsession, I would say. So my career was really launched in retail, spent a decade at Sears back in the day. I'm dating myself. And if you were good at your job and goal-oriented and aggressive, you could have a new job every couple of years at Sears, very much a resume building company. And I think this is actually a big error in today's world for emerging early in career young people is companies don't have these programs anymore. So how do we expect to grow salespeople? So from there, I actually left and took Bed Bath & Beyond public. That was my first like IPO swing experience, and then opening 700 stores in 2 years and the chaos that ensues around all that. And then my last retail job, I worked for Saks. And that was back in the day when Saks had department stores and all kinds of glorious things. And you'd go shopping for the day. And we had cruise wear back in the day, so we just don't have those kind of patterns. And so I shifted my career at that point to more software orientation. So I joined a consulting practice called McMillan Doolittle. Most of my clients were technology clients on the West Coast that were trying to sell to retailers. And I kind of moved into more of a consultatory role for software companies. And that's really what started the journey, Ilya.
Before we dive into that, actually, you speaking about Sears and sort of that structured program, I've actually worked with a handful of, kind of older, established traditional companies, and it's sort of striking to me the difference on how they think about talent development. And since you spent, kind of that much
back
time
in the day, yeah,
Right.
if you wanted to be an operator, when I graduated in college in 1990, I'll date myself. If you wanted to be an operator in retail, you went to the Sears training program, and it was really hard to get into. Very, very cultivated, very curated. If you wanted to be a buyer, you went to the Macy's training program. Very well known, very popular, very successful. Most of the, I'd say, best buyers I've ever met in my lifetime went through the Macy's buying program.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, we don't tend to, grow our own talent these days, right? We expect talent to arrive pre-trained. I think that's a kind of an egregious error in a lot of ways, especially around management training, leadership skills. You can't necessarily learn those from a classroom or from a book. You actually need to practice those as operators. And I think the reason why I've been a great operator throughout my career is I had to run retail stores when I was 27 years old. I didn't have a choice. I had to learn how to figure it out. And so you couldn't be afraid. And so if you kind of are fearless and like, I can learn anything, and you have the confidence from experiences that put you in those positions to earn that confidence, you can become a better entrepreneur.
Yeah, and what I've seen is sort of the generation or two ago in these historic companies, the folks were kind of rotated and had kind of more dynamic, end-to-end experiences. And in many cases, that, and there are some programs still. Like I was, a few years ago, I was at Hallmark, like the card folks.
Yeah, I love that
and
company.
there's still like a lot of kind of work and thinking about how do you educate and digitize and sort of do all these things. And they also have like an art center where folks are carving gnomes and doing all kinds of crazy creative art stuff. But yeah, it's just like it's interesting to sort of think about.
No, I'm going to add on to that because, I was fortunate enough to sort of like go through a program like this at a company called EMC, which most people knew as a sort of global IT infrastructure sort of company and provider. And they had a world-class sort of sales program for like inside sales. And I went through that program and I never learned more in my entire life and career than going through that program. It was like rigorous, a lot of exams, a lot of tests, selling. I mean, it was just a very interesting program. But without that program, I don't know that I would have the foundation, right, to do the things that I do today. So hearing Jen talk about her experience going through the management program and how they sort of rotate you through different departments, you just sort of have to learn. You drink from the fire hose.
You're just showing up and you're like, okay,
Right.
I'm going to run non-selling payroll for Sears from now on. And it's $800 million. That's
That's right.
higher revenue than any of my companies since I worked in corporate America.
That's right.
So, you're like, why does a 29-year-old have the agency to manage an $800 million budget?
Mm-hmm.
In hindsight, I realized that I got most of the jobs that other people had been fired for, and I just wasn't afraid. I was like, I don't know. I guess I could do that. I could do that. It's non-selling payroll. How hard can it be?
That's right.
And I ended up doing amazing things with cost takeout. Sometimes I think those programs give fresh eyes to existing problems that often get overlooked. So I think we're missing a lot of opportunities with how we bring young people forward in the workforce today. And trying to do my part in making that better. I give back at Colby. I participate in our entrepreneurship program. I'm a trustee at our college. It means a lot to me to do that, give back in one generation, to be honest. And I feel like I owe my career to the ability to learn how to learn, which I learned at Colby College.
That's awesome. And I mean, I think in some ways, taking an entrepreneur from the wild and putting them in residence is also, kind of a different training program on how to be agile and running beyond your agency, maybe in some cases, or at the very age of it, at least. And so that's an interesting, I hadn't really thought about sort of the kind of formal and informal training pathways, but that's a kind of an interesting thing to look into. I mean, I guess in those roles though, you almost like, let's move into the kind of consulting software side a little bit more. You learn how to sort of get your bearings, and then ultimately start moving quickly when you're, placed into new roles. So maybe a little bit of that was applicable into kind of your second software chapter and kind of the consulting side.
I think so. I mean, because, the ability to synthesize a lot of information quickly to generate a point of view, whether it's around a product position, whether it's around an executive organization, manifesting how you're going to solve a problem. I think that does kind of pull from multifaceted experience. But I do think, and what I share with a lot of young entrepreneurs is there's always I'm going to fail. I'm going to let an investor down. I'm going to not succeed in a pilot for a client. All those things are likely true. It's how you manage your emotions and yourself to navigate those things that are likely to be true. And if you find them to be energy generating or energy draining, if they are energy draining, you are likely not an entrepreneurial candidate. If they are energy fulfilling, I can be in a pitch, Ilya, for months at a time. If I believe it and I'm in it and I'm in the cycle, lean in harder. Not all people are wired that way, right? Sure. Sometimes the fear of no net is true, is a real fear of, they didn't grow up in a family. Maybe they had traditional careers. Maybe they all, they had sort of normal 9-to-5 jobs. As a sidebar, my mom has not recognized what I do since I worked at Sears because she could recognize what Sears was. But when I started to move to software that had names like True Access or made up names for like data businesses, she keeps asking if you seem to work so much, honey. Are you sure you're getting overtime? She doesn't understand, right? From a sort of a main mode to a software mode. So I often have to remind her that Maine is a different world to the rest of the world.
And honestly, 2 points on that. I think it's really important to know, it's different being a founder than an early employee at a startup. And ultimately kind of the doing and starting a thing versus joining a thing early are also different experiences, even if it's within kind of corporate or something.
Different risk profiles, right? Different risk profiles of individuals, right? Like, I've founded 4 companies. 1 not successful, 3 reasonably successful exits. 1 great exit, 2 reasonable exits, 1 not so good exit. Probably learned the most at the not so good exit, because you learn more from places that are struggling than places that are doing well in most cases. And so the problems at that company, it was a large digital vending machine company that you see in airports that say Best Buy or Sprinkles. But the capitalization of that machine became the challenge for that business. And so in like 08, 09, when it was easy to get debt, we used to underwrite all those machines on behalf of our customers. When that debt line ran up, where does that liability go on whose balance sheet? And that's ultimately what challenged the company. And so the war story that I had sort of teed up to share with you was I had to choose which vendors would be paid. We were running out of money. We had rent payments, we had payroll, and literally sitting down with the controller of, all right, after we pay payroll, who's getting paid? Very, dark times, I would say, very dark times. Nobody wants to feel like they let down their investors, their employees. But in the end, it was actually a business model problem. Company still challenges with that same problem today, which is where does the liability sit? So they never solved the problem. They're still wrestling with the problem, but it's 15 years later.
Well, and that's crazy. So what's fun there is a lot of business model problems. And so you just said a couple things I want to dig into. One is sort of in that war story, it's one thing to say, it was dark times, it was hard. It's another thing to like zoom back there and remember sort of the
Yeah,
feelings and
my
the
heart palpitations already started of sitting there in my like sweatshirt and jeans with our controller, who's, old enough to be my grandfather at the time, God love him. And, you know, having to make, very difficult decisions, that would affect, who would be paid, and how we would do that, and how we were going to handle the wind down, and how you would lay off employees with the most grace possible, and help them transition to other jobs with grace. Very human lessons, I think, that I've carried through that experience through all my other companies. That we all try to take care of employees during great times. We want people to feel energized and participatory. People actually need more support during hard times.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you as the founder may be in it, but to your point, Ilya, the people that join you are less risk tolerant than you.
That's
They're
right.
joining you because they believe in you and they believe in the vision of the company. So it's important for founders to remember that if you get defeated, everyone around you will also quickly get defeated.
So, Jen, from your early time at Sears and all the roles that you've done in consumer, leading up to the role you're talking about now, before we get to what you did in financial services, what lessons did you learn during that very dark time? Where if you can give somebody advice today, right, who's potentially going through that similar thing, what would you tell them?
Give themselves great grace. It's going to be difficult. Every conversation is difficult. Everyone you're talking to is a human being. Everyone has feelings and families and their own concerns. So it's usually around helping the employees. What you realize is the finances for the company are a disaster, and that's a whole other level of crazy. But the people that you can touch every day and can help through,
Right.
This happened over a very rapid period. So there was not a lot of advance notice. And so how you treat people ultimately in that experience, I've been fortunate that a couple of those people have come on to work with me multiple times again, which I think shows with great grace you can earn great trust.
That's
That's
right.
awesome. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to dive into a little bit is a lot of folks don't realize the, sort of learnings of broken business model or bearing risk or kind of the financial mechanisms that sort of either accelerate or slow down scale are actually pretty applicable across, multiple sectors. Like that whole whose balance sheet do you place the cash flow on in like utility and infrastructure is probably going to be the thing that we're going to really have to solve if we're going to unlock institutional capital for the energy transition, right? And a lot of the startups are like coming in, everything's broken, you're doing everything wrong. And it's like, what do you know about finance? And they're like, they're like, where are we going to get $100 trillion? And they're like, and so it's just really interesting to think about.
Yeah, it was a critical lesson. I'd say, it was my first startup. I'd come from consulting. I'd helped him close I'd helped him close Macy's as a client.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't have anyone to run the project, right? He was like, Jen, now that we closed it, we don't have anyone to run the client. Would you move to the Bay Area for a couple of years? And it was 08, 09, it was not a great time to be a retail consultant. Didn't seem like a bad idea to move to the Bay Area for a couple of years. My kids were in middle school. So if I was going to do it, that was sort of the window to do it. And so I was brave. I didn't know anyone. I moved as a single parent with 2 kids to the Bay Area. And I started working with Gower Smith, who's CEO of Zoom Systems, who is that company. And I'm humbled by that experience. It was a hard business, both logistically and capital. It was capital intensive, logistically heavy, working with airports at night and moving in security and retail. And it was a crazy time to be working in that arena. And then with sort of that debt issue that literally sort of happened overnight when the debt lines started to dry up. There was a beautiful business being incubated at Bessemer, which was actually called Bill Shrink at the time, Terrance and Ilya. And a colleague of mine thought I should meet the founder of this business because he thought I'd be a great match to the founder. And I knew a lot of retailers. And this was a fintech founder who was the founder of Yodely back in the day, which was kind of the first transaction data software stack that you could build PFM or personal financial management on top of, or bank statements. It was a big deal at the time. And he was incubated in the basement of Bessemer to start what we then created, which was the card linked offer business, which was the ability to put an offer attached to your credit card that was specific to you, personalized to you, so that when you went to Home Depot and you swiped that card, you would get what we called a cash back or statement credit back on your credit card statement. Sort of a war story, I would add. It was a brilliant space at the time. It was the start of machine learning and pattern recognition. So this is early days pattern recognition. So think about so the thesis of this business was your past consumer spend behavior is the best indicator of your future spend behavior. And then we would personalize offers based on that. Whether you were a promiscuous customer, could I encourage you to try all kinds of different cuisine, or are you only going to eat Indian food every week? Those are the things we were trying to do. So I had lunch with Schwartz at Tivolo on Friday, and I showed up for work on Monday at Bessemer, in the basement of David Cowan's office at Bessemer. And Schwartz and Samir Qatar had done this initial kind of POC about reducing your bills. You put in your cell phone bill, your commodities, your cell, your Wi-Fi, or at the time, cable bill, and it would actually do the math for you to include switching costs to enable you to see which would be the better carrier. We have to remember this was, in 2012. This was a long time ago, right?
Right.
And then we took that business and ultimately expanded it to be a card linked offer business. My largest competitor in the space gave away their product for free to the largest bank in the US, and I could no longer actually charge any fees. So they burned down the business model in the US by taking warrants, providing it to the largest bank for free, and becoming their sole provider. And so I don't think I'll ever get this choice again in my career, but we had a very hard decision to make because we were approaching a B round. And I was not going to be able to sell this in the US. I could not compete against free. They had already raised triple digits in millions, 100 millions. So I needed to either raise money, sell the company, or move internationally, where international consumers could be driven to US retailers. Ultimately, we ended up getting a couple purchase offers and a term sheet, but we chose to sell to MasterCard because they were a global footprint, and I could get to global banks and drive global consumers to US retailers with the same product. So we ultimately had to sell the company to pivot it, Ilya, to basically go to a greenfield international bank that would pay me for that to drive consumer behavior to international shoppers. It just also happens to be the most profitable transaction for MasterCard. So finding that unique opportunity to make it work was, to your point, a little luck. There's occasionally a little strike of luck, but kind of understanding I could continue to beat the bushes in the US, it was going to be not productive. So where do you go? Where do you go when your market has been closed by a competitor?
Wow. What an incredible story, Jen. I have so many levers I want to pull from that story, but for the sake of us thinking about and moving along in the podcast, I mean, Colby College, first generation college student, right? 2 kids, single, moved from Chicago to the Bay Area and probably one of the worst times ever, right? Got acquired by MasterCard. That's already a story, but let's continue.
So I stayed at MasterCard for 3 years in one day. That's
right.
The founder's curse sometimes. A little unusual, actually, that I was not a technical founder. I was a business co-founder, and I ran the revenue for the company. But because I had all the relationships with the merchants, I was actually more valuable than the code. So I actually had to go to MasterCard as part of the arrangement, which I would not have planned for or expected. And then I worked in the global loyalty practice for MasterCard for 3 years and had an exquisite experience of seeing how money moves around the globe, but was on a plane Dubai, China, Hong Kong. It's MasterCard. It's a global portfolio. It is a pace that is not sustainable for most.
That's
And
right.
so after that 3-year period, I was tired, Terrance.
That's right.
And I needed a place to rest my brain. And I had a friend, Ken Hausman, who is a venture guy in the Valley, who was like, you should meet my friend Mike Spicer at Sutter Hill. And you should go be an EIR at Sutter Hill. I'd really not known what an EIR was at this point. It was foreign to me. I'd always worked with venture capitalists. I had been raising money. I'd not sort of flipped the script to be on the other side. I went and had lunch at Sutter Hill on a Friday, and again, I showed up on Monday to start my year as an EIR with Mike Spicer, who I am incredibly grateful to this day, actually.
So this is perfect, Jen, because I was going to ask you about this. When I walked through your background, the trend line you just gave us, one, I wanted to know, where did the risk tolerance come from someone that comes from your background that you said most people wouldn't want to jump and take the leap and do the things that you've done? One, it's a stack question, so forgive me. Where did the risk tolerance come from? And then walk us through your role as an EIR at Sutter Hill Ventures.
Sure. I think it's difficult to teach risk tolerance. I've always tried with my kids to make them agile. There's times to be conservative around risk. There's times to be aggressive around risk. So when I was arriving at Sutter Hill, I have a curious mind, Terrance. And I think it comes from, honestly, a liberal arts education and a little bit of a hustle. I've had to create everything for myself, to including my network, my career, so the drive for risk tolerance, I think, comes from my drive to be curious. I'm always the person who has a side project on their desk. I'm usually the person you call if you need to know someone, if you want me to connect you with someone. I consider that sort of community goodwill. I believe if you help other people get what they want, you tend to get what you need eventually. And so my experience at Sutter, arriving at Sutter, was sort of an undefined role. Come here, rest your brain, be around smart people, and we'd like you to think of your next great idea here at Sutter Hill. We'll pay you a reasonable nominal salary in a place to work, and please come here every day. And we'll assign you to a couple of our Portco companies just to kind of mix it up a little bit where you can add some value. But my real job at Sutter Hill consisted of two primary roles. One, I needed to review all the inbound pitch decks that were sent to Sutter Hill and curate them for processing, meaning I rubric them to forward them to the partners if I felt they were, is this a product? Is this a feature? Is this a real company? Is this a team, right? Is it a company? I'd probably get 100 a week. Probably 2 might check 3 out of 4 boxes that might warrant a second pass. So you got to be really good at screening deal flow.
That's right.
Maybe if we could pause
really
there.
Good.
If we can pause
Sure.
there for a second, I think every founder at some point needs to take a beat and spend time looking at deals. I think that's actually like one of the big differentiators with sort of experienced or advanced founders as opposed to folks just getting started, because I think that experience. So that's my thought, but I'm curious, since you actually
No,
sat.
I would agree, because I've gotten so much better, right? 10,000 hours of anything makes you better, right? The tipping point, right?
Yeah.
Which I have the Revenge of the Tipping Point to read. I haven't gotten there yet. Yeah, so I think you're right, Ilya. It is around that matter.
Yeah, it's just like I love when a founder comes in and they always like, this is the best deal, period. And you have to sort of believe that if you're building the company, right? But
you have to believe it. And I also encourage early in career students who believe themselves to have an entrepreneurial spirit and know they're probably going to get a job and then become an entrepreneur and get some experience, to actually put them in positions to see deal flow. Be an advisor on a company, offer to read decks at the Capital Factory or the Startup Center or wherever you live, show up for the pitch nights at Plug and Play, dig into those communities, because the more exposure you have to deals, deal constructs, how people even think about financing, the more educated you become. That enables you to be more educated as you put your own business together.
And Jen, as you were looking at deals at Sutter Hill, tell the people a little bit around what were some of the signals that you were looking for in this pitch deck around product, around team? What is Jen looking for in these decks that gives her confidence to forward them on to the partner?
Yeah, so for me at the time, so we had a ever-present growing kind of security infrastructure because they were working on Laceworks at the time. They were also working at Snowflake at the time, so that was being incubated as well. And a lot of DevOps type of, again, early days, machine learning, not quite AI yet, but, sort of workflow of DevOps kind of work. And if you know the history of Sutter Hill, infrastructure heavy. They also, really love data businesses that, like Snowflake, right, are creating new infrastructures for others. So we had a little bend towards those types of companies with a nod towards talent, because I think Ilya or Terrance at the beginning, you said somebody called a colleague of yours to go get them to be incubated at a current company at Sutter. They have an incredible talent machine. So you're always looking for perhaps smart founders that may not have the appropriate team around them, that should be maybe highlighted to a partner for a different opportunity, or that this person has an interesting background. And I know we have a couple teams they're looking for this type of skill set or attitude, candidly. This person has a lot of energy and I feel would be a great match to another team. So kind of people separated from company a little bit. And then actually more theses than thought out businesses, because Sutter tends to be an incubation house. So if it was a thesis, for example, genomic health marketplace, 20 years in the future, the ability, if you have diabetes, to go into a marketplace and choose a genomics solution is a thesis that they play long, right?
That's right.
So some of those companies were all around genomics, which I don't really have a background in, Terrance.
Sure. That's right.
But if it felt like they had their IP relatively solidified, their science grants were in line, their team construction, and really what they needed was capital and expansion into those theses, it was really those that probably made it to the partner. It was less about, is this cash flow by year 2? Is this, a bootstrap entity? They're looking for big ideas.
That's right.
So it was not, don't be limited by the business thinking, on those types of pitches. It was more around the thesis.
Okay. No, thank you for sharing. And you had a second part to your role that you did at Sutter Hill Ventures that you're going to tell us about.
Yeah, the second part was actually the grind part, which actually I would encourage EIRs to do this process because it was very disciplined. It's 26 rough weeks a year, every 2 weeks, so 22 cycles. Took out Christmas and Thanksgiving. I had to pitch a new company to the partner team every 2 weeks. And so if you force yourself to create a company every 2 weeks with the thesis, with what you would need, what you would build, why it would be differentiated, and I kind of levered off the design thinking canvas. I'd have them all over the rooms with constant stickies because I'd work on a thesis but build maybe 5 boards.
That's right.
Of concepts. Mm-hmm. And then I would pick the best board and say, well, this week it's going to be that board, and sometimes, great feedback, keep going, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? Or sometimes, yeah, we don't think there's a there. Let's have a good debate about that, tear that up, start again for the next 2 weeks, right? So it, first of all, it makes you sort of bulletproof on feedback. Like, you got to be able to take it to make it. So you got to be able to really dig in critically and accept critical feedback with grace and attention, not be dismissive, and then take that feedback and put it to work and then recycle it. Recycle it. No bad ideas, maybe just bad components.
And how do they know when to kill an idea when they're going through this process?
It's interesting. I think at the beginning it was a little bit of a hazing event, Terrance, to be honest. But all with the best of intentions, right? They're trying to get you to be better as fast as possible. Because really what they hope is that you come up with a great idea that you could be incubated. Tina Wang, who is an EIR at the same time, Ilya, I'd encourage you to have her on your show. She's a DevOps phenom, graduated MIT at 16 and helped Twitter and Google and Apple. She's been around the world and back. She actually just exited that business that she was incubating at Sutter while I was there. So it's been amazing to see. I would also encourage people, and Ilya, one of the things for you would be, why don't people have more than one EIR? Because we were better together. There were 3 of us in the basement, right? So we didn't know each other. We had no common backgrounds, but it was epic to have 3 other people that were doing the same motions at the same time.
Well, and I think just generally, one of the things that I've noticed in sort of my EIR time generally, and just working with larger companies, is the difference between kind of focus on people and team in sort of the earlier venture, kind of early risk. Nobody knows what anything is. Yeah, kind of the team really is a lot of things. And so that point about, multiple EIRs pacing each other, but ultimately even thinking about, who is the right person, the right team composition to make this thing go. And it's shocking to me sometimes when folks are like, well, anybody can run with this. I'm like, oh, let's talk about that a little bit because rarely have I found that to be the case.
Look, I think I'm a big believer that A teams can make C products, A products. C teams cannot make A products. It just doesn't happen. So I'm very much a personal team first investor. I feel like one of my superpowers is to build great teams. I'm honored that I've had people work for me multiple times.
Yeah.
And salespeople. That means a lot to me. I think the culture and how you carry the company is equally as important as the tech, because underneath the people who are writing the tech are people. They need to be fed. They have families. They need sleep. They need all the things that we need. And sometimes we tend to think of engineers as engineers. They're humans. They have the same needs as everybody else.
I violently agree with you, but it's very hard for me to sort of explain that to folks that haven't been there. I haven't found an effective way to make that land.
If you've not seen a high functioning team compared to, and I think it's harder in corporate, Ilya, because you got matrix and all kinds of crazy, infrastructure and silos. Hopefully in startups you're not starting with any of that, but it's easily created, and that's what you have to worry about, right? Is that so? For me, starting new companies, especially that initial founding team, they got to be able to finish their each other's sentences. Mm-hmm. You spend more time with them than you do your spouse the first year. So you better learn to love them, and figure out how to work together quickly. And if you cannot quickly, everybody should agree that is not working. No hard feelings. Let's actually fix what's not working, which may be wrong personality, wrong skill set, wrong time in the business. May not be anything wrong with the individual. It might not be the right time in the company for their superpower.
And Jen, on this topic of team, right? I think all great teams go through this process of forming, storming, and norming, if you will, right?
Great words,
And in my mind, how do you think about building great teams, right? You've built a lot of great teams. You've been on early stage teams. What do you look for? And when you're building a good team versus you're joining an early stage team, what are you looking for?
Trust. My number one ask is, so whether I was joining a team, I joined as a founder, which is a unique position, 2 technical founders. I'm the only liberal arts degree,
That's right.
sort of thing. They used to make fun of me, sort of like American studies. What do you think over there? But I learned to love them like brothers, and I would still call them brothers to this day. My co-founder from Terrance called me at 10 o'clock 2 weeks ago on a Friday night. I instantly picked up because I thought something was wrong,
That's right.
Right. So these are people you sort of go to the trenches with. So for me, I definitely have a bias towards founders or people I have worked with before. I'm a big believer in known commodities. So I like people that have worked with me because they know how crazy I am and they can work with my crazy. Um, and and I also, believe that you must enable people to feel free to disagree and have great trust that you can disagree and still have a role at a 4-person company. Like, all voices are welcome here.
That's right. And you talked about being sort of in a pod almost, right, with other EIRs, which I think is a way better experience than doing it as a lone wolf, like how I did it at SAP versus when I did it in other roles, right? It was like, whoa, I have 8 other EIRs now. I can learn every single day at a rapid rate. You know, if you could do it over, right? Would you change anything about your EIR experience at Sutter Hill? What would you add or subtract if you had to do it over?
I would have been a little more promiscuous on thesis because I had just come out of MasterCard, right? And I was in the belly of the beast for 3 years. You get a little dated. People don't realize, like, robotics, other things had been happening in the world, and I'd had my head down at MasterCard. So I think probably being a little more promiscuous around thesis and
Okay.
not being afraid of exploring areas I didn't know, like robotics, even though I ended up doing a robotics company to get robotics experience. I did a
That's right.
gaming company to work with gaming engines. But I think recognizing that if you're coming off of a transaction where you were required to go in-house, that coming out to become, I don't know, a new animal again, takes a little bit of work to catch up to what you've left behind. So I'd say try to keep up. Don't get sucked into the beast once you're acquired. And then I'd also be more mindful about looking beyond my time at MasterCard. I knew I was not going to stay at MasterCard. It was well understood that this was a 3-year engagement. I could have not given MasterCard as much of my time. So I went into it like I had founded my company and I'd sold my company and I wanted my company to be the most successful inside MasterCard. But what you realize when you get into a large organization, Ilya, and I think this was our first conversation, I actually thought I was doing it wrong at MasterCard because innovation in large organizations is very difficult.
Yes,
And
it
as a
is.
founder, I felt like I couldn't get any traction. And then I took a innovation for large organizations class at Stanford and then realized it was not me.
Right.
It was not me. It was, in fact, the institutional kind of dystopia around me. And
That's right.
so, my guidance for founders that are in that process is don't give away all your soul in the transaction. Keep a little of that back because you're going to want to leave and come out and do something else. And I was really burned out, I would say, at the point I left MasterCard. So it's also a founder lesson of, you know, oxygen mask on first. If you don't take care of yourself, you
That's right.
cannot be there for others. So
Well,
you must put your personal health as a priority.
and I think
Absolutely.
actually just that intentionality, because I think on the flip side, if you know sort of what you're getting into, I think one of the things that I missed for a while in a lot of conversations with EIRs is that the entrepreneur really has to reskill, right? If you're going to be in a large organization or in another context, generally, it's probably not going to be the thing you were great at and the thing you really enjoy before. And so there's all kinds of organizational dynamic stuff. But I think as long as you're walking into that intentionally, there's also a lot of learning and a lot of exposure to sort of places that you may not have exposure to. Right. And so I think it's just important to be intentional in that situation, which,
Absolutely.
a lot of folks just don't have that insight. So maybe that's the thing I would add to
I think it's a good
your
one.
kind of comments there.
Yeah, it's a great one.
I think the other thing I want to dig into a little bit, when we chatted a couple of years ago, I kind of asked you what it was like being a EIR, at a top VC firm in the Valley in the mid 2010s, and you sort of, told me a little bit about how that was a little bit different than kind of how the term is getting used today. So I'd love to have you talk about that for a couple of minutes, and then we'll move on to kind of what took you to Austin.
No, that's true. In those days, it was, I was sharing with Terrance before you joined, Ilya, that, during that era, there was a dinner every month that was hosted by a VC that had an EIR. So, 1 month it'd be Sutter, 1 month it might be Bessemer, 1 month it would, and so one might be Trinity. And they'd host the dinner typically at their office. And there's probably 20 to 30 EIRs with a ever rotating kind of table of people. But It did make that time at Sutter Hill feel very precious when you realize that all these people are also trying to just think of incredible ideas with incredible resources, with incredible backgrounds. And it was also a great place to also pick up other co-founders, other people who had ideas. Your idea might not be the one that gets picked. That person's working on something that's really interesting. And I think I could add value there. So it made it a very agile kind of group. I think if you fast forward to today, there aren't as many EIRs at venture funds. They tend to be more corporate EIRs, in my experience, or strategic kind of positioned EIRs. But what you do tend to have more now are operating rosters for venture capitalists. So as the EIR programs for VCs maybe have been trimmed off, operating rosters of professionals, similar to like how private equity rosters with executives, you're starting to see that become pretty standard practice, around different theses, whether you're a fintech executive, whether you're a consumer executive. And so a lot of those people that might have been EIR'd in the past,
That's right.
are now sort of sitting on a bench, in some ways waiting to be called.
That's
When
right.
an operating company has an issue or a matter that, they need some expertise in. I think there's a lot of anxiety around that operator model actually right now, because there's a lot of great people that sit on rosters that would like to be working. And so they expected that to be sort of an on-ramp to working with great companies. And oftentimes it kind of becomes a patience exercise of, and if you're not top of mind, those types of things. So I'd like to think that the smarter VCs that are now or have always focused on incubation, EIR will always continue to be a thesis because they feel like it's talent first.
No, that makes sense. And I'm glad that we got to dive into that a little bit, because I think, kind of having that perspective and that sounds like a little bit more of an organic community building exercise
It
as
was
well.
at the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was 2016, I think, at the
Yep.
time.
Yep.
Right. So probably the height of, that era of VC swing, to be honest. Yeah. So that was sort of I'd say the peak of Money 2020 and all the fintech euphoria during that time.
That's right. So, Jen, you cut your teeth at Sutter Hill Ventures, and then you went back to operating again, doing what you do best, right? And you became a CRO, Chief Revenue Officer, for those who are listening.
Yeah.
Tell
That's
us
been
about
my traditional role,
That's
even
right.
as a founder. So even at the company I sold to MasterCard, I was the CRO there. I like being CRO because marketing and sales report into one executive, becomes less siloed, and in early days is typically all about your sales expression regardless. So I like that organizational construct and feel like it is the most productive in early stage. And this is sort of why I think my wisdom word would be to always be networking. So I happen to know the venture guys at PayPal, Jeremy Junker and Jay Gupta, and they were investors in a company called Dosh, which was very similar to the company I had sold to MasterCard, only a direct-to-consumer expression instead of a bank expression. Essentially, long story short, they needed to package that company up for a transaction. It was time. And so lots of work to be done there. Balance sheet cleanup, reorganization, merchant alignment, rev ops, engineering. A lot of cleanup work to get that to be a packageable company. And I think we did a fantastic job. And we sold that in a private transaction to Cardlytics, which is the company that edged me out originally by giving away their software for free. I ended up selling that company to Cardlytics in 2020, January 2020.
Wow.
For a $275 million price. Was a great exit for all shareholders.
Mm-hmm.
It was a wonderful experience. And then I've done, interim fractional CRO roles for episodically over the last few years. That's been my primary work with entrepreneurs, is really go to market and revenue acceleration.
And that sounds like, we've seen a lot of the EIRs we've talked to are sort of in their portfolio phase, if you will. And it sounded like you were kind of entering that phase and sort of delivering a lot of the value and skills that you develop pretty intentionally. What's cool with you is you've sort of gone back and sort of jumped back into product and going into Maine. So I'd love to talk a little bit about how does that take us to Maine Love and ultimately into the
That's
packaged
right.
good business.
Full circle
Well,
moment.
Yeah.
full circle moment, I was the CEO of a glass container company called Life Factory back in the 16, in that same era. We sold that to Thermos and still exists today. And it was to get plastic out of your family's life. So it was baby bottles to glass food storage to beverage containers, glass with a silicone wrapper. Learned way more about supply chain sourcing of glass than I ever imagined I would ever need to be. But sort of fast forward, I've been blessed with an amazing career with amazing people and amazing companies, and I don't plan on retiring. Both my children have graduated from college, and I had a call back to Maine by being asked to serve at Colby as a trustee. And so, in one generation, to send my daughter to Colby and then to be asked to come back to serve as a trustee, um, I can't express how wonderful that feels. It's just an honor. And so, to make a long story short, my cousin bought a brewery a year ago. And in helping him to understand how to size his facility, I stumbled on a problem that brewers' lines of infrastructure sit idle roughly 5 days a week because it takes 2 days to make beer. And that Maine has the most brewers per capita. But more importantly, Maine has the second purest lake in the nation, in Sebago Lake. It is actually has an EPA waiver of all things for solids. It's so clean that it is not required to be filtered like other, municipal water. It's a special class of municipal water. It is considered infinitely replenishable. And the common denominator of beer is water. And the gold standard of water for beer is from Sebago Lake, Maine, which is where this water comes from. So coming back to Maine with an intention to be impactful in Maine and to drive jobs to Maine. I had a brain drain when I had to leave Maine. It is my intention with great passion to come back to Maine and build a product that brewers can participate in. So what we're enabling is brewers to become participants in the water economy when they're not making beer. So they need to become a GMP or GS1 rated facility because brewers are not regulated by the FDA, if everyone can believe that. Brewers are regulated by alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. So none of the floors of brewers are sealed, which is a fascinating experience.
Yes.
But to get to to manage the federal requirements for drinking water, et cetera, we will be upgrading those facilities, and then I ship them the can. They fill it with water. I pay them to put water in the can, and then I do the retail expression on the other side. So it is intended to be foundational revenue for brewers so that they do not have to lay people off. And alcohol consumption is down 40% year over year across the board. And Gen Z is not drinking as much as we did. So they're more health conscious. And water increasingly is more of a precious commodity. So there's an argument in Maine that we are overabundant in water as long as it rains.
Nice. Well, and I love, that it really, Terrance said that bringing it full circle, but I think it's, bringing it full tapestry because that has sort of the kind of impact view, the taking advantage of underutilized infrastructure and sort of understanding the supply chain view, sort of interesting business model view.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been
just
able to do this company if I hadn't done all my other companies.
That's
And
right.
I've walked 32 breweries this summer, have my own outfit, got my own boots, like the whole situation. It's a sexy outfit, I might add, with a hat and the whole thing. But walking those 32 breweries, I can say with confidence, every small brewer, likely in the United States, has capacity because they're craftsmen. They're not really utilizing it as a infrastructure. So it's been a very interesting exploration. I've gotten the 3 largest brewers in Maine to join the band, so to speak, because up here in Maine, you have to say what you do what you say. So I'm proving it out this winter with actually produced this water yesterday at
Mm-hmm.
literally the 13th brewery in the nation, Geary's
Mm-hmm.
1803.
Mm-hmm.
Very famous brewer. Still making the same beer in brick vats, old school, with
Nice.
yeast that's 60
That's
years
right.
old. So these are craftsmen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this gives them a way to run, to continue their focus on great beer, but yield water when you're not making beer to pay off your infrastructure.
Wow. I mean, when I think about leaving a legacy, right? I talked to Ilya and some of our guests on the show about legacy building and leaving an impact. I'm going to use the analogy of water, watching your legacy flow through sort of
Thank
Maine,
you.
and I think it's a wonderful way to come back full circle to the place that groomed you, and to try to leave a legacy that's not just some junk but healthy for people from a sustainable source, and that you can leverage to build a business around because you found a problem.
Well, and Maine has a history, Terrance, of self-regulating natural resources. We have
Mm-hmm.
lobster co-ops. We have oyster co-ops. Essentially, I'm building a water co-op. I give you a
Right.
boat price to put water in a can if you meet a certain water standard.
That's right.
We've done it for generations. It's very natural for people in Maine to do this. I don't believe I could do this business in any other state because it's taken great collaboration in the brewing community to come forward with their chemists to get interesting problems solved to get to where we are. And I just don't experience that collaboration in other states. So it's a joy to be doing this in Maine, and it is the rest of my life's work to be impactful in Maine.
Absolutely. And Jen, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to let Ilya take us home. Okay.
Sure.
But it's going to be a fun one. And we love to ask people sort of if, what's something that's not on your resume, not on your LinkedIn, that people don't know about you, right? That's a hobby of yours, or something that you enjoy doing or helps you pass the time. What would you be willing to share with us in our audience?
I'm a big reader. I still read fiction books. I read a lot of nonfiction as well, but I consume an incredible amount of content, I would say. So um, just because you leave college, don't put down those fiction books. Keep reading because it's a
Right.
different part of your brain that needs exercise, and it's a way to kind of balance off your brain. I also participate in an oyster farm that
Ah,
is off my family's property. So one of the first
nice.
oyster farms that came to Maine is off my family's riparian rights, off of some land we own in Casco Bay. And so being adjacent and part of learning the oyster farm culture that is emerging in the aquaculture community in Maine has been an incredible thing to watch and to encourage and participate.
Wow. Thank you for sharing.
That's awesome. And just to double click on the reading thing, it's funny because all of a sudden today we're talking about AI. Where does it lead? And a lot of folks haven't read a lot of the science fiction that has sort of imagined all the various
Absolutely.
sort of pathways where we go from here to dystopian, utopian, and everything in
That's
between.
right.
And it's just it's amazing kind of how both that allows you to sort of tap into other folks' thinking as well as to have sort of frameworks and vocabulary and kind of other things. So yeah, love double clicking on that.
And I think in our culture today, Ilya, is, also read controversial things,
Yep.
right? Like fact check yourself. Like
Mm-hmm.
read something controversial because it might make you uncomfortable. It's okay, right? You'll end up being smarter in the end.
Well, and that skill, I think, that's actually my best test. You mentioned a couple properties of an entrepreneur and team that you look for. For me, it's coachability, and also if you see that your map and the terrain differ, what do you follow? And I think that ultimately is a good identification that somebody's going to follow the terrain, right? It's sort of strongly holding idea, kind of having strong statements but weakly held on
Yeah.
on
Yes.
ideas
Yes.
is really important.
Yes.
So I think that's
Yes.
actually
Absolutely.
a really good place to kind of
Great.
cut us off for now, because I think we've done a really good pass through your background, had an opportunity to sort of jump in and highlight, I think, a couple things that are really critical, honestly, to our audience of entrepreneurs and residents and folks that are really thinking about it. And ultimately, I love the fact that we ended up on, doing the sort of your life's work for the rest of your life in a place where you're excited about being impactful. And I think that in many ways speaks to kind of who I know you to be in our kind of short interaction to date. And so I think that's a great place to leave it. And hopefully we'll kind of dig in a little bit more on LinkedIn Live in the future.
Happy to help. And thanks for having me.
Absolutely. But Ilya, I can't let Jen go without asking her what the EIR network can do for her.
Oh, absolutely.
And supporting a Maine Love. So what can the EIR network do for you?
You can't be an expert at everything, right? So, and I'm a little rusty on my retail distribution. So I'm actually looking for some supply chain assistance.
Okay.
Honestly, more current supply chain. I'm a little dated, right? So more a little supply chain education never hurts. I've been taking a lot of meetings with a lot of people who know more than I do about that matter, and I'd welcome any EIR in the network if you're interested in water and the water economy and how you start a water economy in a state with a lot of natural resources and a lot of bureaucracy. I'm happy to help.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. I just happen to be an EIR focused on supply chain at SAP. So I'm glad you
might be needing you, Terrance. Yeah.
But I know a lot of other folks in supply chain. So
I appreciate it.
We will find them. Thank you so much, Jen. It's been an honor and privilege.
Thank you. Oh, honor and privilege for you both as well. And let me know how I can help in the future.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. My goodness, I am still, taking notes from this episode, my friend, because Jen had so many gems to drop on this episode about early stage company building and formation, learning her chops in the early days at Sears and bringing that along with her in her later roles in Silicon Valley, and taking the leap from different things, right? From consumer to financial services to looking at infrastructure deals inside of Sutter Hill Ventures. But what I took away the most was that the muscle that she built around early stage company formation and assessing deals at Sutter Hill Venture and looking at signal, right? And doing that alongside a team of, business athletes is what I'm going to call them right now, that are other EIRs who are also doing company building in parallel and doing the same thing you're doing and sharing those learnings, priceless, and was there during the early days of Snowflake and a bunch of other prominent companies. The other thing is trust as the cornerstone for building great teams, right? And managing those teams and retaining that talent to build everlasting companies and growing revenue. And lastly, leaving a legacy worth bragging about. And that legacy is the impact that she's doing now with her next company called Maine Love. And just so many gems, so much wisdom in this episode. And I just really enjoyed it. And could have talked to Jen for another 2 hours. But what do you think, Ilya?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think really we just scratched the surface. I think we started getting into a little bit of the inside football of, what do you actually gain when you see so many deals and are working with really top tier, both kind of strategic thinkers from the investment side, as well as, very high caliber operators, and sort of what does that actually arm you with in order to be able to do this quickly? We kind of touched on high performance team, high level of trust, but, in the conversation, those are words. I think it's, every founder and every really innovation professional should seek out the opportunity to really spend time in that environment, because it's like, you hear stories of, the Super Bowl teams and the dynasties that were built. And everybody always talks about, there was a culture, there was a winning culture, there was a, sort of an atmosphere of excellence and things like that. Right. And those are really, I've never played on a Super Bowl team, but I've definitely participated in some really high caliber, fast moving teams before. And as I was telling Jen in the show, in the discussion, right, I agree that that's like a really, really critical piece of it, but it's really hard to explain to somebody that, hasn't experienced that yet. And I love really digging into those kind of things because you start to, really talk about the trade craft, if you will, of what it means to be, in residence as an entrepreneur or whatever.
That's right.
And I'm really looking forward to digging into, and I really do think we just scratched the surface, but yes, and 1,000 times to where I really felt like we were touching on some really interesting concepts and ideas that I wish folks that are EIRs, and especially like the folks that they interface with, could sort of beam to that place and build some of that muscle through contact, which unfortunately is impossible. But that was the thing that was kind of exciting to me. I think we touched on that, and I think also maybe to kind of double click on another thing you said, I think that formal training process and being able to compare, what skills and capabilities do you need to be sort of world class, and being able to sort of level set against that, and her kind of having a different experience on that was interesting. I think it was sort of an opportunity to compare and contrast how are people, training up and really getting prepared for these things today versus how, it's happened in other periods of time. So super exciting. We only scratched the surface, but it was an awesome discussion, because even in that little bit of a scratch was, a bunch of insights. So it was great.
100%, man. As we know, entrepreneurship is a team sport and it's a contact sport. And that's how you get the battle-tested war wounds. And the people are going to learn it on this episode. So please go follow, subscribe. You don't want to miss this episode, and send us recommendations for future people who you think should be on the podcast. Thanks for joining us on EIR Live. We hope today's episode offered you valuable insights into the entrepreneurial journey. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes, and check out the description for more details. Do you have questions or suggestions? Please reach out to us. Connect with us on social media. We really value your input. Catch us next time for more inspiring stories and strategies. Keep pushing boundaries and making your mark on the world. I'm Terrance with my co-host Ilya Tabakh, signing off. Let's keep building.